Welcome to the beautiful St Augustine. Now, when you think of this historical, beautiful city, you think about shore. I'll see a couple tourists here and there checking out the sights, not exactly knowing the stories behind these said historical spots in this beautiful city. Now, besides the awe associated with this historical city comes along the haunted history behind this historical place. In this short documentary, I will prove to you why CNBC.com dubbed St. Augustine the 6th most haunted city in the nation. To start off with, let me take you to one of the more popular spots in St. Augustine, the Castillo de San Marcos National Monument.
Behind me is the Castillo de San Marcos, full of history and full of haunted history. So I'm about to tell you a little bit closer up to the Behind me is the Castillo de San Marcos, and I'm about to tell you a story that depicts a guy. His name is Don Carlos, and he was married to a Spanish wife here. And he was walking along the top, and where I'm standing actually used to be a moat. Now, he had dropped his ring down in the moat, and instead of just going home and facing the wrath from his wife, he decided, hey, let me go down here and get the ring. Well, you see the little tippets of the white paint? Because this castle or fort used to be all white. Now, the smart man, since it was late at night, decided to bring a lantern with him. Now, the enemies at the time saw the light and decided to shoot 2 cannons that were about the size of a tennis ball. And coincidentally, one of the shots went right through Mr. Don Carlos' chest. And they say to this day, they see the shadow of Don Carlos moping around this side of the castle, searching for his ring.
That story, however, is not the only one associated with the Castillo. Another popular story comes to do with Osceola. Now, he is dubbed to be the most popular intellectual haunting or spirit that is seen at the Castillo. The backstory is when he had contracted malaria when he was held captive in the fort. Dr. Whedon had taken him up to Charleston, where he ended up dying. However, Doc Whedon cuts Osceola's head off, kept the head in a pickle jar, and used it to scare off his young daughters when they weren't behaving. No one knows what happens to the head, and story says that he gave it to his oldest daughter for a wedding gift. Now, there to have said to be rumors that Osceola was seen walking across the bridge at the Castillo, still looking for Dr. Whedon to get his head back. Although Osceola is the most commonly seen spirit or apparition at the Castillo de San Marcos, St. Augustine's most prominent ghost would be Little Elizabeth. The time is 1808, and they created a walled-in city. The gatekeeper's daughter was between the age of 7 or 11. Historical reports cannot be certain. However, in 1821, they knew that the gatekeeper had a daughter named Elizabeth. And the reason why she is dubbed the most prominent ghost in St. Augustine is because there is a total of 7 to 11 911 calls every year. Now, in 1821, there was a yellow fever epidemic that hit the city. As it was a strong Catholic town, the people believed that people who died from the fever should not receive a proper burial. Now, Elizabeth had contracted the fever and died shortly after. So what her dad thought was that his daughter deserved a proper burial. So as the gatekeeper, he did what no one could imagine a father could do. He wrapped his child up in the middle of the night, opened the gates, and laid her body outside of city limits. Now, hoping that the next morning someone would find her body, thinking that some barbaric animal had killed her, the next morning Elizabeth's body was gone. So they say that Elizabeth still roams the city walls and the city gates searching for her father. Next on our stop, we're going to talk about the St. Augustine Lighthouse, which was dubbed by the show Ghost Hunters as the Mona Lisa of paranormal sites. According to my tour guide, the Reverend Haywood J., Dr. Ballard, who was prominently seen smoking tobacco, had died there as former owner. To this day, people can attest to still smelling his tobacco. Another haunted story associated with the lighthouse had to do with 3 children. 2 children belonged to one of the workers at the lighthouse, and one was an anonymous child. However, upon research, I found out that she is claimed to have been an African American child. Well, all 3 children had died a very horrible death by accident, and even workers back then had attested to still seeing ghosts of these children. For example, a worker had sent home a letter to his wife the day of the accident saying how sorry he felt for seeing the mangled bodies of his young children. However, a couple days later, he wrote his wife saying that he is to come home immediately because he couldn't take the sight of one of the children always passing by him. Now, how could that happen if the child was dead? Last but not least, I'm going to take you to my most favorite place, and to me the most interesting place during my tour, the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum, formerly known as the Warden Home or the Rowlings Hotel.
Currently I am standing at Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum, and it used to be formerly known as the Warden Winter Home that was built in 1887. This is where the tour started and where it ended, and you are going to see more to come.
As most of St. Augustine was built on burial grounds, in 1887, William Gray Warden had built his family a home upon the battlefield of Castile, claiming to have seen throughout the years 18 separate identities. In 1925, when one of Warden's daughters of 8 years old had died, the building was condemned. No one was to enter the summer home ever again. However, in 1941, the infamous author Rowlings had bought the building and turned it into a hotel. On April 23, 1944, there was a fire that struck the hotel. As historians have went back to the building and reenacted the fire, not literally, but just try to figure out and determine if these 2 women that died, Miss Betty Richardson and Ruth Pickering, died from the fire. They found out that there was no real plausible way that these 2 women had died from smoke inhalation, which was both of the women's causes of death. The fire, which was a small one, had started down one small hallway, leaving both ladies multiple ways out. Now, not to mention, they both had 2 fully functioning windows that could have been opened if the smoke was getting really bad. But coincidentally, both women were found dead in their bathtubs laid the same way, with a piece of cloth covering their faces the same way as well. According to the lead investigator of my tour, Mr. Eric Fatizzi, there's a theory behind this occurrence. They don't think it was a naturally started fire. They think that it was a fire started by a character named Mr. X. A couple days before the fire, this man, described to be in a pinstripe suit, had checked in to the hotel, also paying for Mrs. Betty Richardson. It's not a big coincidence that when both ladies were found, Mr. X was never seen again. Mr. Fatizzi was a spectacular tour guide. First, he brought us to a little movie room that he later told us belonged to the late Betty Richardson. Now, as he welcomed us into the room and signed us to go and sit in the theater-styled seats, he then pointed out that no one ever chose to sit in this specific seat that, coincidentally, I was sitting right next to. He said that in his 2 years of experiences, there could be so many people packed into that movie room, but no one ever chooses to sit in the 2 seats that Betty Richardson's bathtub was positioned to. We then assumed to Mr. X's room, where he purposely tried to signal us in without telling us, trying to position someone into the spot in which people normally see Mr. X's apparition. However, coincidentally, none of us stood in that spot, in which he said has never happened in his 2 years of working there. Coincidence? I don't think so. After the tour, I was able to catch up with Mr. Fatizzi and actually snag his phone number. No, Professor Logan, not like that. I wanted to interview him to see if he had personally experienced firsthand some paranormal activity. And he says that, and I quote, "The job's not for the faintest of heart." The first time I physically saw anything was when a film crew from National Geographic was filming in the building. After they had left, I was shutting all of the lights off alone, and when I walked into Mr. X's room to shut off his lights, I saw something out of the corner of my eye run away from me. It was big and black. Needless to say, I briskly walked the hell out of that building, leaving half of the lights still on, and locked the door and went home. I hope that this short documentary urged you to return back to St. Augustine at night and go on the Ripley's Believe It or Not Ghost Tour. I definitely recommend you to request for the Reverend Haywood J. and for Eric Fatizzi. For more information, please visit ghosttrainadventure.com.